We left our first lodging just after sunrise, when the mist was still lifting off the meadow and the moss on the trail held the memory of night. The path into the forest began gently. It wound upward between country homes and small gardens, then out into open land where the air smelled faintly of lichen and damp earth. I remember thinking how deceptively easy it felt. The road was firm, the incline manageable. Even my walker rolled more smoothly than I expected, its wheels clicking lightly over small stones. We had all agreed the night before that the pilgrimage had not only physically begun, but spiritually as well. Orientation was well over, and we were up to the neck in it. Now we would learn by walking. Francis walked ahead of us, not with any dramatic sense of authority, but with that unmistakable lightness he carried, as if gravity had always treated him kindly. Claire walked beside him, her brown habit simple and unadorned, her veil catching a little breeze. She was slightly behind him in step, but not in presence. If Francis radiated invitation, Claire radiated interior steadiness. David walked near me today, ever watchful, ever concerned about how the women in the group would fare on the trail, his own pack on his back. He carried it by choice, though he had been offered the same kindness extended to the rest of us older pilgrims. For him, carrying it was part of the prayer. His long white hair rested against the collar of his flannel shirt, and the sun caught the edges like threads of silver. Mom and Dad, who you know as Joyce and Harriman, walked a little ahead of us. Dad no longer leaned slightly to the left, and he seemed to walk completely fine without his cane. His pace was surprisingly good. Mom kept half an eye on him, though she pretended she wasn't. I think we both had difficulty seeing him as healed, though we knew in our minds that he was in a body provided for him by heaven for this pilgrimage. He looked to be in his 60s, though he had passed in his 80s. Mom and I thought that God had done a good job, giving him a younger body, but still close enough to the way we remembered him. Mom did not appear at all old beside him. She had always been young. Even now in her 80s, she was fit and trim. Pearl trotted between them, her ears jiggling, her tail spinning in that bulldog manner, occasionally glancing back at the rest of us to be sure we were still there. Her loyalty was to Mom and Dad, but she was convinced she was completely responsible for the entire group. The young ones, Sean, Liam, Aoife, and Lucia, had chosen to carry their packs. Maria did too, though hers was small and neatly organized. Sean and Liam were debating something about Irish saints and early monasticism. Aoife walked quietly for once, watching the fields. For perhaps an hour, the road was kind. Then we reached our first roadblock. It did not look dramatic at first. The path narrowed, curved around a stand of trees, and then simply stopped. A recent landslide had come down from the slope above, spilling earth, broken branches, and large stones across the trail. The ground beyond was visible, but the way forward was obstructed by a mound too steep and unstable to cross safely. We stood there in silence. Francis did not speak immediately. He looked at the earth as if it were an old friend. Well, Liam said at last, that's inconvenient. Harriman chuckled. That's one word for it. I felt something tighten inside me. The first real obstacle. So soon. A part of me had known, of course, that the road would not remain smooth. Still, I had hoped for a longer stretch of comfort. Dad and Mom glanced at each other, then at me. To Californians, a mudslide is common, but also dangerous, and often takes months to remove. Francis turned to us. What do you suppose this is? He asked lightly. A landslide, Sean said. Yes, Francis agreed. And? A problem? Maria offered. Francis nodded. Yes, and? Aoife crossed her arms. A test? Claire glanced at her with a soft half smile. Perhaps, Francis said. Or perhaps it is simply part of the road. Lucia stepped closer to the mound of earth. We could try to climb over it, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Dad tested the edge with a large branch that had rolled off the mud. I was surprised at his strength and agility. The soil shifted immediately. Not stable, he said. David rested his pack on the ground and looked up the slope. We could attempt to go around through the trees. I followed his gaze. The trees were dense, the undergrowth thick. Joyce folded her arms. Or, she said, we could turn back and look for another path entirely. It might be longer, she added hopefully, as if that was a positive thing. There it was, the options. Francis crouched and picked up a small stone from the debris. He held it in his palm. When you cannot foresee the roadblock, he said quietly, what can you control? How we respond, Claire answered, almost under her breath. He looked up at us. How will you travel? The words lingered. They felt like something David had said in his Bible study earlier. As a Lenten pilgrim, I cannot foresee all the roadblocks, but I can control how I travel. I felt the question land squarely in my chest. Not how do I remove the obstacle, not why do this happen, but how will I travel? With irritation, with fear, with resentment, or with an open mind, a generous heart? Pearl barked at the mound as if it had personally offended her. Sean laughed. The bulldog votes, we bulldoze it. Claire stepped closer to Lucia. I saw them exchange a few quiet words I could not hear. Then, from the trees to our right, two figures emerged. They were dressed in the habits of another century, simple Carmelite brown, with their garments austere but not severe. The woman's eyes were lively and penetrating. The man's face was thin, contemplative, almost otherworldly. Teresa of Avila walked with brisk purpose, as though obstacles had rarely delayed her for long. John of the Cross followed slightly behind, his gaze attentive but inward. It did not feel strange to see them. It felt expected. Well, Teresa said cheerfully, surveying the landslide, you've met your first interruption. John's eyes moved slowly over the mound. The road does not end here, he said quietly. It only becomes less obvious. Francis greeted them as though they had merely stepped out for morning air. We are grateful for your company, he said. Teresa waved her hand dismissively. You'll be grateful later, perhaps. Dad leaned toward Mom. I like her already. Teresa turned to us. Tell me, she said, what is the goal? We looked at one another. To reach our lodging, Liam said. To complete the pilgrimage, Maria added. To follow Christ, Claire said softly. Teresa smiled at that. Yes, and what is he inviting you to become? There was silence. John spoke then, his voice low but clear. The roadblock is not the enemy. It may be the invitation. I felt a quiet shiver. Ignatius' words echoed in my mind. I cannot foresee the roadblock, but the roadblock may be the invitation. Francis stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. What if, he asked, this is not about moving the earth, but about allowing the earth to move us? Sean groaned good-naturedly. That sounds like something that will require effort. Teresa laughed outright. Of course it will. Did you think reforming an entire religious order involved comfort? Maria looked at her more closely. You faced a lot of obstacles, she said carefully. Teresa's eyes flashed with humor. My dear, if I stopped for every obstacle, I would never have founded a single convent. Claire, still beside Lucia, spoke quietly enough that only a few of us heard her. Sometimes, she said, the obstacle reveals what's inside us. Frustration, pride, fear, or trust. I felt my own impatience rising. My legs were already slightly tired. I had hoped for a smooth day. I cleared off the seat of my walker and sat down. John stepped toward the trees. There is another way, he said, but it will not be straight. I noticed my mom perk up at that. I had grown up with her manifesto. If there's a longer way, take it. We followed him into the brush. It was not elegant. We had to lift branches, step carefully over roots, help one another around thick undergrowth. At one point, my walker caught on a vine. Both David and Sean freed it with exaggerated gallantry. I had to smile. Sean swatted at leaves and muttered something about sensible trail maintenance. Teresa seemed invigorated. Do you see? She called back to us. The obstacle forces creativity. David walked beside me, steadying the walker when the ground dipped. Patience produces endurance, he murmured. James 1, 2 through 4, I knew. Count it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you meet trials of various kind. I almost laughed at the word joy, yet something in me softened. The landslide had not changed, but I was changing. I realized that this was a surprise, and surprises usually led to a meltdown, but I was actually doing okay. Maybe a little grumpy, but okay in general. Maybe the physical exercise helped, I reasoned, making a mental note about it. We reemerged onto the main path beyond the obstruction. It had cost us time and effort. My arms ached from maneuvering the walker, but we were through. Teresa dusted off her habit. Well, she said, that was hardly a dark night. John's lips curved slightly. Not yet. We continued on. Mid-morning, the road sloped downward toward a small river. It ran clear and lively over stones, sunlight flashing across its surface. The sound of it was a relief. We decided to stop there. David found a flat rock near the bank. He set his pack down and rested his hands on the open pages of his Bible. He did not begin teaching immediately. He simply watched the water while we gathered. The rest of us spread out, eating bread and fruit, refilling bottles, and resting legs. Francis sat on a log with Sean and Liam, asking them about Ireland, about the monastic heritage, about their families. He listened more than he spoke. Claire sat beside Lucia, who seemed quieter than usual. Teresa and John stood a little apart, speaking softly together. I caught fragments. Carmel, reform, obedience. Maria sat near Mom and Dad. I heard Mom recounting her story about prayer walking the coast years ago, how wind and rain had been both enemy and friend. Pearl waded into the shallows and then retreated indignantly when the water proved colder than expected. I sat near David, watching him prepare to speak. He looked up at me. How are you traveling? He asked gently. I hesitated. More honestly, I said. He smiled. When he finally began the Bible study, his voice carried easily over the sound of water. He spoke of trials and endurance, of asking God for wisdom without doubting. He did not mention the landslide directly. He did not need to. The river moved steadily, indifferent to our small dramas. After the study, Teresa approached David. You speak of patience, she said. Good, but do not forget boldness. John nodded. And detachment. Francis joined them. Patience, boldness, detachment, he said thoughtfully. These are companions. Claire added, and love. As we resumed walking, the path grew steeper. This was not a dramatic obstruction like the landslide. It was a long, grinding incline through rocky terrain. The sun climbed higher. The air warmed. I felt my breath shorten. My dad walked ahead of me this time, turning often to make sure I was steady. Mom fell back to walk beside me. You good? She asked. Mostly, I said. She nodded. I used to think, she said, that the biggest roadblocks were the dramatic ones, accidents, illness, loss. But sometimes it's just persistence, the daily climb. Dad, a few paces ahead, turned and winked. Speak for yourself. I find dramatic ones quite memorable. Mom rolled her eyes affectionately. Teresa and John slowed their pace to walk near the younger ones. Liam asked Teresa about reforming Carmel. Didn't people resist you? Of course, she said, and sometimes I was tempted to resist myself. Lucia glanced up. How did you know you were truly called to it? Teresa considered. I asked the Lord to enlarge my heart, she said. If the desire remained, even through opposition, I trusted it. John added quietly, and sometimes the way grows darker before it grows clearer. Maria walked beside Claire. You and Francis, she said. Did you always agree? Claire smiled. Not always in method, but in love. Maria laughed softly. He seems so free. He is, Claire said, but freedom was costly. At the crest of the hill, we paused. From there, we could see a wide stretch of woodland, and in the distance, a clearing where we would camp. The descent, however, was treacherous. Loose stones shifted underfoot. My walker wobbled dangerously more than once. Sean offered to carry it. I refused. My mom insisted that she take it, and I held my dad's arm. This was part of my pilgrimage. Halfway down, Liam slipped and fell. He landed hard, scraping his palm. He sat there, stunned. Teresa crouched beside him. Are you injured? She asked. Only my pride, he said through clenched teeth. She smiled. Good. That one heals slowly. John offered his hand, pulling him gently to his feet. Francis looked at the slope. What does this teach us? He asked. Sean snorted. To walk where we step? Perhaps, Francis said. And Claire's voice drifted down from a few paces above, that the path is not always as firm as it appears. I felt something shift inside me. We had expected beauty. We had encountered effort. We had expected clarity. We had found detours. By the time we reached the clearing, the light had softened toward evening. We gathered wood and built a fire. Pearl circled twice before collapsing dramatically near Mom's feet. Teresa and John remained with us. Around the fire, stories began to unfold, not in lecture, not in piety, in laughter. Sean asked Francis whether he truly preached to birds. Francis grinned. They were attentive listeners. Claire shook her head fondly, and sometimes more patient than people. Teresa leaned toward Sean. Did he tell you, she said conspiratorially, that once he tried to give away his cloak and returned nearly frozen? Francis protested lightly. It seemed like a reasonable act at the time. John added, he has always been generous with what was not his. Laughter rippled through us. Maria asked Teresa about the famous quote. No wonder you have so few friends, she said, smiling. Teresa raised her eyebrows. I did say that. To Jesus? Lucia asked, wide-eyed. Yes, Teresa said, but I said it as a friend. John's gaze softened. Familiarity with God does not negate reverence. It deepens it. Dad poked at the fire. Did either of you ever have guardian angel stories? He asked, half teasing. Teresa considered. There were times, she said slowly, when protection came unexpectedly, but one does not always know whether it was an angel or a providential circumstance. John nodded. In the dark night, one learns to trust unseen help. Claire turned to me quietly. You are watching, she said. Yes, I admitted. What do you see? I see that holiness is not tidy, I said. She smiled. And? That the roadblocks were not interruptions, I said. They were invitations. She looked pleased, though she did not say so. As the fire burned lower, Francis grew thoughtful. What is God inviting you to become? He asked the group. Not in general, specifically. Sean said he wanted courage without bravado. Liam said patience without resentment. Maria said steadiness. Lucia hesitated. Confidence, she said softly. Mom said, trust that doesn't need to control. Dad grinned. Grace under inconvenience. David said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, to know God's will. When it came to me, I swallowed. Joy, I said quietly, not because the road is smooth or predictable, but because He is present. Teresa nodded approvingly. John's eyes flickered toward the darkening trees. Remember, he said, the night is not always the absence of light. Sometimes it is the stripping away of what you relied upon. We lay beneath the stars that night, the forest quiet around us. I could not foresee the next roadblock, but I no longer felt afraid of it because I knew something I had not known before. The obstacle would not define the journey. How I traveled would. And somewhere in the unseen spaces between our steps, the Holy Spirit was shaping us through landslides, steep inclines, scraped palms, and long conversations by rivers and firelight into something truer than we had been that morning. The road did not promise ease, it promised invitation, and we were learning slowly how to RSVP with a yes.